I'm truly delighted to welcome Senator Paula Simons, who's an Albertan senator and a member of the Independent Senators Group. Before the Senate, she spent 3 decades as an award-winning journalist and a columnist at the Edmonton Journal. I truly appreciate the opportunity to meet with you today, Senator.
Thank you very much, Sheila. It's delightful to be with you.
Thank you. Given your background as a journalist and advocate for free expression, how do you see the role of communication technologies like radio and mobile platforms in advancing social justice and empowering marginalized communities globally?
I think that radio is almost like a magic power because it speaks to people so intimately, because the startup costs are relatively low, because with digital platforms, it can reach many more people even than shortwave could in the olden days. And it empowers people because it allows people to take ownership of their own stories. I think once upon a time, there was the idea that, people would turn on the radio and a smart person would tell you what to do. But these days, the platforms are so much more interactive. And so it's not just a top-down communication. Radio and podcasts can be a way for people to communicate with one another, to share their knowledge, to share their traditional wisdom, but also to share their innovations and their new ideas. And I think at a time when so many conventional media platforms are in financial crisis, at a time when there are so many bad actors spreading disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, it's never been more important for the health of our democracy for there to be trusted, reliable, factual information that people can turn to and people can rely upon.
Absolutely. Given your focus on public health and social equity, how important do you believe it is for Canadian foreign aid to prioritize grassroots, community-driven initiatives like Farm Radio International?
I think especially at a time when we see the United States descending into what I can only call the heart of darkness, if I can borrow the term, when we see the Food and Drug Administration of the United States sharing disinformation, malinformation, it's never been more important for people, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, not just in the global south, but all over the world to have reliable information and for there to be community information so that we're not vulnerable to propaganda and we're not vulnerable to campaigns of lies, but so that people can be empowered to make the best possible choices for themselves, their families, and their communities.
Absolutely. In the context of Canada leadership on global development, what opportunity do you see for the Canadian Senate to support innovative approaches that address food security and climate resilience, particularly for women and youth in rural communities?
One of the challenges that the Canadian Senate faces is that foreign policy is the purview of government. And there are many of my colleagues in the Senate who come from a background in international development or international diplomacy. We have a former ambassador, we have somebody who spent years working in microcredit. So there are people who really know the international development space. And I think sometimes they feel quite frustrated that the Senate itself can't do as much as they would like to push that agenda. But we're trying. There are a lot of us in the Senate who care about these issues, not just because of what they mean for the people in the global south, but what they mean for people in Canada too. Because the lessons about things like regenerative agriculture to fight climate change, regenerative grazing practices to make sure that land that isn't suitable for agriculture can still be used for grazing and be used to be a carbon sink. These are lessons that are global lessons. And so I think, in my time when I was for the last 3 years the deputy chair of the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry, we authored a major report about soil health and the importance of soil health in fighting climate change. So it's not an international thing per se, but the lessons we learned are absolutely applicable around the world. And as part of my work on that report, I got to visit the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Rome. and I got to meet with soil scientists from around the world, with soil advocates from around the world. And it was really interesting to me to see how much we can learn from other countries that have taken better care of their soil because they have so much less of it. And in Canada, we sometimes taken our resources for granted. And I think it behooves us to look at what's happening around the world and say, what can Canadians learn from that? And not just always think of ourselves as going over, with having all the answers.
Absolutely. Building on your experience in fostering dialogue and amplifying community voices, how do you see farmer to farmer connections, farmers helping farmers, whether through radio programs, mobile platforms, or other communication tools, contributing to knowledge sharing and resilience in rural communities?
It's interesting. Farmers aren't risk averse. Farmers are exposed to more risk than almost any other field of economic endeavor because they're forever at the mercy of the weather, of the markets. So they don't change their practice very easily because they're managing so many other risks. And what we learned in our soil study is that farmers are much more likely to think about adopting techniques that are better for the environment and better for the climate if they see other farmers doing them first, if there's that kind of peer-to-peer communication. People
Yes.
don't really love it when an expert shows up from out of town with a list of what you should and shouldn't do. But when they hear from somebody who's fought the same battles, who's faced the same challenges, saying, you know what, I understand why you're hesitant to do this, but we did it. It took 3 years for there to be payback, but in the end, it worked. That is far more effective a form of communication than something that's top down. So I think that radio and digital radio platforms have a unique capacity to help people connect because it's one thing, if you're talking to the farmer who farms next door,
Yeah.
but maybe the person you need to talk to is 100 kilometers away. Maybe the person you need to talk to is in another county or another country. And if you can connect with them through audio, if you can have a conversation with them that doesn't have to be face to face, but ear
Yes.
to ear, then you can spread the news of what practices work from trusted voices. And that's going to be far more important and have far greater impact than somebody who comes into town and gives you a condescending lecture.
Absolutely. Um, what would you like to add before we conclude today about international development and what you would like to see from our government?
At a time when the United Nations, at a time when the United States is slashing its funding for international development, at a time when China is stepping up to fill the gaps left by the United States, and at a time when UN agencies like the Food and Agriculture Organization are seeing their funding that comes from the United States slashed. It has never been more important for Canada to try to step in and fill some of that void, for Canada to work with partners like the EU and the United Nations to provide the support that the United States can no longer be relied upon to give. And so I understand that in a time when Canada is facing significant economic challenges brought on by the Trump trade war, there's a temptation for us to retrench. There's a temptation for us to become insular. And I think the lessons of history are that that is a very dangerous posture to take. This is not a time for us to retreat into a shell. This is a time for us to leverage the soft power and the national reputation that Canada still possesses to be in the development space, to be opening our doors to more international students, to be doing more international outreach and dialogue. I've just come back from a remarkable week at the United Nations College in Bonn, where I got to be part of something that had the rather pretentious name, the Global Changemakers Academy for Parliamentarians. And I was there with 28 other parliamentarians from around the world talking about soil health, land reclamation, using, best land policies to fight climate change. And for me to meet with parliamentary colleagues from Namibia, from Lesotho, from Eswatini, from Uganda, from Kenya to Zambia, Zimbabwe, and to hear about the challenges that they face and the way that they are confronting them was so absolutely inspirational. I don't know that they learned anything from me, but I learned a heck of a lot from them. And that's
Yes,
the other thing. I think, we mustn't get into a sort of a neo-colonial mindset that somehow Canada has all the answers and we will go unto the world like missionaries and share those answers. What we need to do is be building those relationships because our traditional alliances are not going to be there for us. And we'd better make sure that we have friends around the world because we may need them.
absolutely. But thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your informed and intelligent insight. It was a genuine pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And thank you so much for everybody who's taught me so much about Farm Radio International.
Thank you.